Hi everybody, this is Dan Stolbarger. Welcome to this week's KFIR Middle East update, the last update for 2021. Oh my. So, our news bites this week. What's going on in Israel? What's going on in the Middle East? Well, there's some concerns regarding COVID. Obviously, no big surprise there. In fact, headlines. Israel's headed, this is from Naftali Bennett. We have a major article here called The Unraveling that's beginning to take place. But right now, Bennett's government's like a caged animal into a corner, sort of lashing out because they need whatever fear tactics that they can drum up as soon as possible. So no big surprise here. Headlines, Israel's headed towards an outbreak of coronavirus, the scope of which will be larger than any the country's ever seen before, etc., etc. We'll get into that in a moment. Golan Heights is back in the news. Israeli government's continuing to declare their commitment to the Golan. They're determined to keep the territory. They must, as we know. And so last Sunday, a national plan was presented that authorized for the construction of some 7,000 housing units, which kind of would double the region's population. I wonder how many of them are designated for Trump Heights. We've had the opportunity to see that project being developed in the Golan. And then we have this bizarre, what's up with Benny Gantz right now? Gantz has hosted Mahmoud Abbas at his home, and we'll talk a little bit more about the details of what's going on there. But I guess we should give a shout out of congratulations for Mahmoud Abbas, because as you probably know by now, he is beginning the 17th year of his 4-year term. Let that one sink in for a moment. Year 17, and he was elected for a 4-year term. Well, on the other side, not meaning to be lighthearted in any way, we had another shooting take place because of this meeting with Abbas and Benny Gantz. Hamas is wanting to kind of kick the hornet's nest. So there was a shooting of an Israeli construction worker on the border of Gaza. And of course, Israel retaliated with tank fire back and forth. So that's recently just taken place. I don't know if it's done or if it's going to escalate, because once again, we know that Hamas needs the support of the people, and the way they get that is to lash out with terrorist attacks against Israel. So I think one of the biggest articles that I want to talk about, and by the way, make sure you grab the PDF PowerPoint. It should be just a link on our YouTube site, but you can always go to our website at holygroundexplorations.com. And so it's my belief that we're beginning to see what I call the unraveling. As I mentioned before, a caged animal lashing out, whether it's Biden or whether it's Bennett. Right now we're seeing this whole hysteria of Omicron. It's said to be moving through the Israeli population, but the reality is simply this. The symptoms appearing seem more like a common cold. Along with this, there's the realization that the vaccine's not helping. There's a shelf life to this vaccination, and how many more jabs and boosters when it's not producing. And so Israel's population, which used to be considered to be the most vaccinated in the world, has sort of stalled out, with only 45% being vaccinated, according to current definitions. Again, part of the reason why is because both the injected and the uninjected are getting sick with COVID or with Omicron, but most people, the vast majority of people, fully recover. And so it's these shocking headlines that's forced to, which creates a sense of control for governments. Israel's confirms that nearly 3,000 daily COVID cases as Omicron threatens to be the world's worst infection spike known to mankind, stuff like that. And then, of course, the United Kingdom comes out and says the concept of mass deaths and hospitalizations, the bottom line is that that's now ancient history. That's just not happening, whether it's the Delta or the Omicron. And then the simple truth is that although these infections have spiked with this new variant, it appears to be less severe. Never want to underestimate a human life. And I know that people die of the flu, of a common cold, you name it. But the reality is that this pandemic is losing its steam. And Naftali Bennett, possibly Biden, they need this control. They need the population to be fearful and to give them all the power. And that's what we're seeing. And that's why I'm saying, I think the unraveling's beginning. If you followed KFIR or Middle East updates over the years, you know that I've spoken very highly of Carolyn Glick. And on this next slide that's just got her name on top, I've given you her latest contribution to Israel Hayom, a daily newspaper. I strongly urge you to click on that and to read that article. It's literally, the title is "The Empty Suit at the Head of the Table." And it's typical, classic Carolyn Glick, scathing report of Naftali Bennett and his government. So I'll leave that to you. And then keep an eye on Bibi. They're going back and forth. There's snarky remarks going on from both Naftali Bennett. Keep in mind, Bibi's still the head of the opposition. Bennett, his daughter, supposedly has Omicron, so he's quarantined himself. But then it was mandated that he had to have an appearance in the Knesset, and Bibi was not going to let him out of that. And so Naftali Bennett's yelling, "You've lost the plot. There's going to be a massive outbreak of COVID in the Knesset because you've had me come here," even though he sat in isolation for a voting procedure. And Netanyahu's response was, "Quit whining." So keep an eye. This government is fragile, and at any time there can be a recall. What else in the Middle East? When we think about Benny Gantz, we think about Mahmoud Abbas and all the violence that's taking place in the West Bank. One of those areas is a place called Shechem. The Palestinians have renamed this Nablus, but Shechem is the resting place of Joseph's bones, his tomb's there. And over the last week, there's been 2 attempts of Palestinians to destroy Joseph's tomb. Again, through just violent force. And so you can take a look at that. And this is their so-called peace partner. Obviously, the bones of Joseph in Shechem. Biblically speaking, we read about that Joseph said, "You don't leave my bones here." Why Shechem? Some believe that's where Joseph was actually betrayed by his brothers. So his bones are in the tomb there. And then, as I mentioned, Benny and Abbas, there's a larger article here. It's just rather bizarre, but Palestinian Authority, leader of Fatah, Mahmoud Abbas, and head of the defense of Israel, Benny Gantz, spent a couple hours, 2.5 hours, in Gantz's house. And it seems like Abbas is saying, hey, I'm not in favor of all the violence in the West Bank, but threatened Israel regarding the Temple Mount. And so I'm not sure what to make out of this with Gantz, with this, is this a beginning of Gantz wanting to advance himself into consideration as the Prime Minister of Israel? But it's noteworthy. So, and then update on Iran. Last week, early in the morning on December 28th, several Israeli F-16 fighters struck again a Syrian port, Latakia. Repeat performance from weeks ago. And the target was a shipment of containers under which the guise was that it was food and humanitarian aid, but the reality it was weapons and missile components. Massive destruction of the port took place. And again, it's a saber rattling back and forth. And the shipments, just once again, the Iran's typical behavior of funding terrorism, and they've been doing some bizarre thing, war games, launching ballistic missiles, because Israel is making the statement, if we have to go it alone, we will. You will not get a nuclear weapon. So everything that's going on, and my friend Amir Safarti has written a book called Operation Jaktan. I've given you a photo of that because the setting's pretty incredible, very updated. I don't want to give the plot away, but it has to do with drones. And of course, it seems like Iran now is all in terms of they're facilitating not just the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, but all of its tentacles into terrorism, whether it's Hamas, whether it's Hezbollah, whether it's the Islamic Jihad, massive amounts of drones, drone warfare. I strongly encourage you, it's a page turner, grab that and you'll be done with it almost before you start it. Taking it to the streets, just sort of wrapping up here, mass protests going on in the streets of Tel Aviv. Tour guides, the importance of tour guides. They're coming back at Lieberman in terms of when he said you might want to find a new employment. Bottom line is that the power of tour guides to shape opinions of what Israel is really like, we can't overestimate that. Bottom line, Israel does a lousy job marketing itself, I guess you would say, but most of us have been tremendously impacted by what? Not Israeli newspapers, not Israeli videos, not massive reports from the news media. No, it's the local tour guides that share their love for their land and changes everything that we read, the noise from the outside. So again, for Holy Ground, as you know, we've got a trip on the books in March. Who knows? But we're praying that Israel will reopen because we know how important it is for people, believers, to walk the land, to understand both the Israel of the Bible as well as the Israel of today. And since this is our last recording for the year, the last slide here is simply a request. We want to keep all of this free. We do a Middle East update on video. We'll start doing a weekly Bible study on video. You know by now we have weekly Bible readings, but because of Omicron, we're not able to get into Israel at this time, so we do need your support. And so please consider us for your end of the year donations. And so with that, shalom, God bless you all. Happy New Year.